Thanks a lot. So I was wondering actually whether this beautiful magenta colored stripe here, whether you just put that on for us, for Deutsche Telekom. Thanks a lot. So I think it's the first time that we are here, and that's an experiment now, because we as a telco provider will now dare to tell you how we look at the retail industry and what we believe is changing and needs to be changed. So interesting to see whether this one works. So let's look at that topic. So we believe that the retail industry and the consumer electronics, you folks, if you are in that industry, you do have quite some challenges. Okay, we also have them in our telco industry, but we also see them in your industry. And if we look at what these are, there are quite some. Especially for those who don't run their business in the online world, you actually hardly know your customers. I want to be a little provocative, so happy. We're probably going to do a little Q&A afterwards, so really interested to see whether you have different views on this one. But we believe that these customers who typically walk in your door, you don't know them. Unless you're not Tante Emma and you don't have that very small retail store since 20, 30, 40 years where you know everyone in your neighborhood, then you probably don't know the customer walking in. And if you, at the point of the checkout, when you'd ask that customer for that loyalty program card, if you then at that point of time ask them, do you have whatever, payback card or whatever app, then you get some information about that person based on the historical purchases. But then it's actually too late. I mean, if you look at that entire process, if someone is checking out, how do we influence what this person has bought if you know who that person is at that point of time when they're going to pay? And definitely for those who are in this hybrid world, that you do have an online store and you also have your shops, I mean, it's hardly to see this omni-channel strategy. I mean, you have that transparency on that person who is sitting on the internet with your online shop. You know who that is. But let's assume you're a consumer electronic shop and this person has just looked at a TV, finally decided not to buy it because he or she wants to see it live, and walks in that consumer electronics store. Do you know that this person was just about to buy a TV? No. So this is a problem. And the other problem is that if you have this customer loyalty program, and I did mention one, but I do not want to explicitly call this one out, you have quite some high costs, and you need to ask yourself whether you get the return on these costs by getting the transparency on your customers. And not any kind of clusters, anonymized, that particular customer. And if you have an answer to this one, then you directly run into the topic of data privacy. So how come you have all that transparency about that person? And that's definitely something where the data privacy experts do have no opinion, and you need to look at many data privacy regulations to do so. And last but not least, and I do not want to now draw an entirely black world, but last but not least, if you then come up with the idea, I'm gonna solve all that with a beautiful app, I don't know how many apps you have installed. I know that I have 170 installed, but I don't have all stores, even within the 170. And that's the next problem you're gonna run into. So who really installs the next app and has then that tiny little folder with these 20 shop apps? All right, so that's the problem. You should not end low, and this is why now we're going to start looking into the future and how can we solve what I've just talked about. And why is that now a telco guy standing on stage talking about these problems in the retail industry, now talking about network APIs? Now, let's first of all look at what do I mean with a network API. So first of all, network, okay, that makes sense. Representative from Deutsche Telekom, he or she probably talks about the network, be it now the fixed network or in that particular case, the mobile network. So we are talking about our mobile network. Now, an API is an application programming interface. So this is a connection to our network. Now, what is that good for? And I brought you a few examples of these so-called APIs, and I'm going to walk you through what they are doing. Now, the interesting piece about this one is that this is fairly new. Because if you look at the telco industry, you realize two things. The first thing is we are super protective. We are not opening up our networks. We do not let anyone in. We do not want to provide any kind of information. We are sitting on our data. We are sitting on our network. That had been the strategy when it comes to opening up, when it comes to providing the information to the external world. We do have. That's the one thing. And the other problem is, great if Deutsche Telekom does something, but my customer, as a shop owner, probably is not a Deutsche Telekom user. So how does that look like if my customer then uses a different network? And I'm going to touch this one. But let's first look at some of these new APIs. Now, the first one is number verify. It does precisely how it's called. So it verifies a number. So if I enter my phone number somewhere, this API takes that number and we're going to check whether this is true, whether this is really your number. I mean, you need to use your device for us to check whether this is the number of that device. But with that number verify, we can authenticate your number. So why should we do that? I mean, if you have experienced a fraud, then you find the answer directly in there. We can, with that, prevent, at least to a certain extent, fraud. But not only that, if we can check your number, we can also authenticate you in a more silent way. All of us have experienced this one-time password, 6-digit codes. I mean, this is gone if you use number verify, because then we can authenticate you in the background without you entering this 6-digit number. So this is number verify. The other one is device location. Now this also gives somehow a hint what this API does. So with device location, you get an information back about the location of the device. Now, why should I use this one? There are many, many reasons why you would do that. Let's assume you are a bank and one of your customers would like to get an abnormal amount of money out of this ATM, let's say 5,000 euros. And typically, this person just withdraws like 2 or 3 or 400. You could think about whether this credit card just got stolen. And to better find out, you could check whether the mobile phone is also in front of this ATM. Because most likely, people have their mobile phones with them. If I now use an ATM, I most likely have my mobile phone with me, and by checking whether this phone also is in front of the ATM, the likelihood is now quite high. If the phone is in front of the ATM and the credit card is in the ATM, that is probably not a fraud case. But this is just now the fraud example, and I have a few more. So just explaining what this API does. Now the next one also is a pretty strong one. We call that KYC, and it's called Know Your Customer. Know Your Customer, also it gives a hint what it does. It provides you back information about your customer based on the information we as a telco have. Now, our identification processes are quite tough. If you want to get a SIM card from us, we really check who you are. And we really have a quite high quality of information in our database when it comes up to customer data. And we can provide that information back. So if someone sends us with this API call a phone number, we can provide back the address, the name, the birth date, and definitely latest at that point of time, you're gonna ask yourself, okay, data privacy, hold on. So does Deutsche Telekom now just provide any kind of customer information through a simple API call? Just to be clear, no, we don't. We need to get the consent of the user. So the user has to click on a button. Yes, I want that Deutsche Telekom provides that information back. And if we get that consent, and we're going to store that consent that we've received it, then we provide back that information. Now, why is that good for? You could easily do age verification. And this example is also a real one. The examples I'm giving you are real examples. That example about age verification, and this is typically that point of time, me standing on stage where I'm looking, and it's quite bright here, but I'm looking at the reaction on the audience. So the best example for age verification, which is currently in the market, is for the adult entertainment. Others say porn industry. I don't know whether you know, I was not aware of that number, what the largest portal, how many accesses per day they do have. And you would not get that number. It's 2 billion. 2 billion accesses per day to that portal. Now, their problem was that in the US, in 70 states, there's a law that this self-declaration, I'm 18 years old, please let me in, that this is no longer sufficient to grant access. And more or less overnight, they shut down this portal in 17 states. Now, if you sit in Germany, you probably have experienced the Postident-Verfahren, and it's definitely a great process, but probably not if you want to use the portal and you would like to get now your age verification through. Now, with an API, which is called KYC, we can do that very silently in the background at a very low cost. And again, it needs consent, but instead of clicking, yes, I'm 18 years old, let me in, by clicking, okay, I acknowledge that I'm now providing back my age information, we believe that this is a very valid use case. But that was just age verification, and there are many more examples. And in addition to providing back information, there's one further API or service I would like to mention. This is rich communication services. And this is somehow similar to WhatsApp. Everyone is well aware of WhatsApp. Many of you are aware of RCS, as it's called, if you use an Android phone, because this is the messaging function. Now, the messaging function, based on RCS, comes not only with text, it allows you to send pictures, to have an interaction with your customer. So it's more or less quite modern. And since Apple has opened their ecosystem to also support RCS, this service has more or less a full coverage in the market. Now, why is that interesting? This is interesting if you want to interact with your customer without them installing an app. And still not just sending text and then also adding a link, because sending text like in an SMS format and adding a link by saying, hey customer, why don't you confirm your booking for tomorrow? And if you do not want to confirm, why don't you change it by clicking on that link? How many got told, don't click on a link in SMS messages? No, you shouldn't. But if this interaction happens within the transaction, for example, through RCS, this is the new method. Now, I talked about the change of the telco industry, that we are providing this information. And this is just the start. So you have seen the first APIs. We have implemented 6 of them. out of a set of almost 50, which had been defined in the broader telco space. And as said before, that would not make too much sense if it was just Deutsche Telekom doing so. This is why the telco industry has created a joint venture with these brands. And if you look at the coverage, this is the who is who of the telco industry. So you find the 3 big Americans, you find the 4 large Europeans, Bharti and Jio, the 2 Indians, representing more than 1 billion people, Singtel and Telstra. So these are the founding members of this joint venture, which was found together with a technology partner called Ericsson in September last year. This transaction is about to be closed. So this company called Aduna will get live within the next 4 to 6 weeks. And their charter is to ensure that we have global coverage. And even after this announcement in September, a few weeks, months later, there are currently more than 60 telcos who have agreed upon to provide their APIs and actually the same APIs to the market. And that makes it now interesting. So in Germany, we do have already the full coverage. So Vodafone, Telefonica, and us offer the same kind of APIs. So whatever I've told you, you can also hear from our, not really competitors, because at the end of the day, we are jointly working together to create this new market. And you get really a huge coverage by those 10, but also by the next who have already onboarded to that joint venture. And I mentioned that these APIs are standardized. There are a lot of bodies who do so. Let me call out Camara. This is an open source initiative. You hardly have heard about this one, but this comprises of more than 400 companies who came together to define these APIs. And these 400 companies, again, they are not the telcos only. You'll find Amazon, you'll find AWS, you'll find Google/Android, Microsoft, you'll find SAP, Software Now, all the big software companies. So this really is a huge ecosystem who was founded 3 years ago to define these new APIs in a common way so that it also adds value to the users. Now let's bring the things together. I've talked about the challenges we see in the retail industry. I talked about the APIs the telco industry offers. Now, how do these things match? And there, we believe the future is all about hyperpersonalization. You would like to know, you would like to get the same transparency you probably do have about your customer in the online world if we are now talking about a customer entering your shop. And this is where we now add value. Because with these APIs, and remember what I've just said, with Number Verify, we know who you are, together with a great startup, Perfect ID, and Timo sits here in the first row. We've added additional information to your number, and since you as a customer sit on that data, it's fully GDPR-compliant. So we know who you are, we know your preferences, we know when you enter a store, device location. We also have information about yourself, age verification. We actually know your address in case you decide that you do not want to buy everything in the shop and you want to have some delivery to your home. We know all that. Less than sure, we just know it if you give us your consent. But if we give you back like a voucher that you can save 5 or 10% and not for any kind of goods, for the goods you're really interested in, this is probably where we get your consent. Because also at that point of time, you do not get spammed with any kind of marketing information. you get precisely the marketing information which fits your profile. What I like at least as most, these shopping cart abandoners. So again, we know who you are in your online world, but it would be so great to know whether you just looked at coffee machines and then you enter that consumer electronics store. And even to the companies we talk to, they get very excited about that use case because they have so many screens in their store. If they knew that that person is interested into a coffee machine, they immediately could display some ads for coffee machines. And they also talked about real-time auctioning amongst their suppliers who now gets that ad. So it's already an ecosystem we have started to discuss with the industry so that we not only provide the information, that this leads to a totally new shopping experience for the consumer, but also for the shop. We talked about send these multimedia messages. This is now that important missing link. How do we now interact with the customer? I mean, good that we know all that, good that we have something to promote, but if one doesn't have the app installed, or the app is installed but notifications are set off, how do you now interact? And through RCS, we have that solution which allows you in a very modern way to interact with your customer. It looks like an app. You can have a lot of interaction built in, but just sending this RCS message. And unless someone is not using one of these old Nokia phones with a Symbian operating system, so unless someone uses an iPhone or an Android-based phone, this one gets through. And finally, also, number verify can be used for that silent authentication I talked about. So just in case you're not interested in all of that, what I just said, because you only run an online shop and you have full transparency of all about your customers, you might want to consider silent authentication, which no longer needs these 6-digit passcodes. Much easier to use. So if this was still too theoretical, I have one last offer. So we have a booth more or less just outside this one here. And in case you're more interested in also the real examples, why don't you visit us? And we can then have a look at your specific situation. And we still have a few minutes of time. And I would like to get in that kind of interaction to better understand, does that resonate with you? Do you see these kind of challenges? And do you see these potential solutions? So happy to get your questions and comments. And I see one over there.
All right, we got a question in the back.
I mean, one question, one concern. Question, is it fair to say that you are more or less tracking me every time? You know better than Google what I'm doing at every point of my operation or using internet? And B, if that is the case, you are more or less know my location, you know what I'm searching, you know what I'm doing, and then you will try to sell that. Isn't that a privacy issue for me? Because at least in Google Map, I can switch them off my location, but with you, you exactly know everything without switching off. So how that would get, solved as a customer?
It's a great observation, and I would fully subscribe to that. If you add one word, that we can know all that, and we only know that if you allow us to do so. This is really the big difference. So you have to give us consent. Then we can activate this API call, which is like a subscription-based call. So that means if you enter that store and you give us the consent, please inform me whenever I enter that store about the latest and greatest ads of that store which fit to my interest. In that particular case, we are activating this subscription API. Yes. And you get full transparency of what you have granted us access to or consent to. And at any point of time, you can revoke that. If by tomorrow you decide that that was too much of advertisement, then you can turn it off. So it's absolutely your decision. And let's also be clear, also the information about your preferences, you're providing them with us. We have no clue what these are unless you're not telling us. And you in that particular case mean your phone number, which gets hashed. So actually even the store who receives that information just gets a hashtag, so there's no chance to revert that back to you as a person. Now we just know, okay, this hashtag has entered the store, this person is interested in gluten-free food, and we have something to offer. This is how it's supposed to work.
Anybody else have a quick question?
I'd like to follow up on that one. So how different is this then from third-party cookies, which are so not liked by many browsers, people, and so on? At least, like as the other person said, that with Google, you can log in into your Google account, clear your history, delete it, and you know where it is. With the telecom company, I don't know where to go to say, hey, all the telecoms who are part of this API network, just delete all my data. So it's, in a way, with Google, it's actually easier, it seems. So maybe you could explain the difference and how you can control this.
Yeah, I think they're actually two. And if I'm not right, then Timo will wave his hands because he's the expert and will add more. So I think one of the biggest difference to this one is, in that one case, Google has the information. In that other case, you sit on the information, and you decide upon what part of the information you're going to share and with whom. That's one difference. You sit on your information. And this is why, from a GDPR perspective, when we ran that through all of the legal advisors, they said this is the only solution if you own your own data, which is compliant. That's the one part. And the other part is, I mean, in the Google world, we are just talking about the online world. Our problem is the offline world. And we are now connecting the two things. If it had all of that transparency we have, what Google has in the online world, if someone enters a store and we know exactly, okay, I know what your preferences are, but we don't have that information as of today. And we are bridging that gap. These are the two main. Did I miss something? No, great, thanks.
Not sure if I correctly understand, but I'm assuming there's a complete profile that you have and that I can edit, right? So like things like my personal income, my height, my sex, my age, stuff like that. Is that possible? And then the question would be, I edit that, right? So I can change my age, I can change anything depending on how I want the system to believe I am, or is that misunderstood? You just track things that you can verify, like the location.
Yeah, I think there are two things to really distinguish. The one thing is, we as a telco do have information about yourself, who you are, where you live. This we need to get whenever you subscribe to a tariff. And this is when we check your passport or your personal ID, and based on that information, we verify that this is the information which you present to us. We check whether we believe that you are the same person and the picture is the same one, and then we enter that data in our database. This information sits in our database. You can't change your sex, birthday, whatever, unless you don't come back with a new identity, passport, and we have that discussion. And that information we can provide back to someone who asks through an API call, if you give us consent, if you really accept that we share now the information we do have about you. The other thing is about your preferences. Now, this is in addition, when we talk about that new shopping experience, how do we now connect the online world with the offline world? And this is done together with Perfect ID in that system where you sit on that information. It's just stored on your device, and you decide upon, with all the information you have given us, with your Google searches, with your Facebook activities, you can decide upon what you're going to share. Based on that, you can decide upon how we characterize you. Based on that, you can decide upon what next time you're going to share with the shopping center.